First, I want to welcome, meeting recorded. I'd like to welcome our new members. If you just wanted to say hello,
That's right. Are they?
that's it.
Hello.
This is the first meeting. And with that, I will turn it over to Louisa to start our agenda.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Independent Budget Office Advisory Committee meeting. And we are happy to be with you today to report primarily on IBO's work on the New York City executive budget, but also on some other recent work product. And we look forward to conversation. So I think we're going to share a slide deck. So Erin's going to put the deck up.
Can you all see this?
Yes. Can everyone else see it? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so here we are in the meeting, and this deck is also attached to the calendar, as are the minutes. So I think the first page we have, can you go to the next page? Thank you. So it's just an overview of our meeting today. As I said, we're going to discuss the executive budget, and then we also thought we should discuss some recent publications that we think are particularly relevant, the state of rent stabilized housing stock and transit affordability. That's both free buses and expanding fare fares. Next slide. So the first action we'd like to take is to adopt the minutes from the last meeting. A draft was distributed to you in an email, and it is attached to these to the calendar invite to this meeting. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes or any requests for changes? Okay, if there are none, could I make a request for a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
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 Thank you. And now a vote, please. Any discussion? And now a vote, please.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you. The minutes are adopted. Next. We wanted to go through some staff changes. So the first is to highlight two promotions, both in the Housing, Environment, and Infrastructure team, the HEI team. Emily Promick has been promoted to a senior budget and policy analyst, and John Mendez is promoted to lead budget policy analyst. And so we'd like to thank them both for their awesome work and encourage them to continue. In fact, they're both speaking today. So thank you. The next thing we wanted to flag is that we have a special summer intern program this summer, specifically targeted for CUNY. And the intern started on June 8th. And we have 3 interns, Ulrich Mitton, Mariah Galindo, and Ruby Lynn Navarro. And we welcome them this summer and look forward to working with them. So thank you, CUNY interns. And we also wanted to say a goodbye, and that is that Caitlin O'Hagan, who was our senior budget and policy analyst in the education department, has left the independent budget office, but luckily she is still in our family, and because she is now the assistant director for education in the New York City Council Finance Division. So we appreciate all the awesome work Caitlin did and know that moving forward, we will still be talking to her all the time. Thank you. Next slide. And here is our org chart, and I'd like to flag an additional change, and that is as you look in the middle of these circles, you will see that we now have Brian Galan as the Assistant Director for Housing, Environment, and Infrastructure. And that is because we would like to offer our congratulations to Brian on his recent marriage and new name. Next page. And you can ask him why Galan. It's a very sweet story. Okay. So now here we are at the heart of our meeting. First, we're going to start with the executive budget. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So as you know, the charter allows or it requires in the first year of an administration, the administration to publish their executive budget. And this year, a city council legislation was passed to extend that because the state budget had not been completed. Despite the 2-week extension, the state still had not completed its budget. And so when the administration published their executive budget on May 12th, they were using what we refer to as placeholders. In other words, educated guesses. The state budget was not completed until about 59 days late. And all of you understand the consequences of that. That said, IBO's analysis did incorporate state budget information as they had completed their work just a few days before we published. And so now we're going to talk about basically how the placeholders lined up with what was in the state budget mostly, some concerns, and why we believe that for now things are okay, but that things are going to get quite challenging in the out years. I'm going to hand it to Logan.
All right, good morning, everyone. Yeah, just to talk through our estimates of revenues and expenditures right now, and we're going to keep this relatively brief because we can go ahead and read the report. But we're seeing that there's going to be a small surplus of roughly under $500 million. That's 476 million in the current fiscal year, and we anticipate that being put forward towards the prepayment. That's after IBO's reestimates of certain expenditures, which became clearer after the state budget, including Tier 6 enhancements. And that's leading us to a relatively manageable gap of 1.6 billion in FY27. After which we are starting to match the administration in terms of the order of magnitude for gaps in the far out years between 2028 and 2030.
And we'd like to note that the administration continues its practice of doing reflecting expenses that match what they anticipate to actually spend. And this is a different pattern than we saw with previous administrations. To highlight some of the state budget impacts,
I think I'm going to hold on. I think, are we on the right slide? Oh, okay. We're in the impact slide. Sorry. Erin,
So
you
we're
got to
gonna-
look at your texts. Okay. So we're going to talk through some of the clear impacts where the state budget had positive impacts and also where there's some question marks in what we're seeing. So the first thing we wanted to talk about were the child care vouchers. As you know, New York City provides subsidized child care vouchers to low-income families, which is a means-tested program accessed through a portal. There are about 110,000 children right now receiving such vouchers and about 25,000 children on the wait list. And the reason there is a wait list is that this portal has been closed since June of 2025. The funding for this is both state and city funding, and the state paying the initial portion, and then after that initial portion is used, the city and state having the state committing to a generous match as the city pays its portion. Currently, it is only state funding paying for the portion. However, that state funding is intended to end. And so what we are seeing is a structural deficit or a structural shortfall because the city has not budgeted for additional funding. And here you could see it's 1.8 billion in 26, 849 million in 27, and 818 million in 28. And there are no signs that childcare voucher demand will increase. In fact, should the portal be open, we would estimate that additional funding would be needed. So we are quite concerned about the childcare voucher situation. The next area of concern has to do with housing vouchers. So as you know, City FEPS is the second largest housing voucher program in the country, second only to Section 8, with a rapidly increasing demand and cost curve in New York City, up to about $2 billion this year. And the state created a separate housing voucher program called the Housing Access Voucher Program, and it is funded year to year. The administration estimates that about 33 million of the 50 million in this program will come to New York City and will be administered by Housing Preservation and Development. And this estimate is that about 900 to 1,100 households will be able to access this voucher program. But we want to flag here that this does not lessen or impact City FEPS, that City FEPS's shortfalls were not, or fiscal challenges were not shifted because of this funding. This is an additional housing voucher program. And the third thing we wanted to flag were the Tier 6 pension enhancements. So as OMB Director Solomon flagged yesterday, in the executive budget, there was 110 million added annually for unspecified Tier 6 changes. And as the director noted, those funds were in fact less than what will be needed. The city's chief actuary estimates that the enhancements to Tier 6 will increase the cost by about 151 million in 27, rising to about 179 million in 2030. And so based on these estimates, IBO projects that there will need to be additional funding of 41 million and 69 million. Any questions on the state budget impacts? Okay.
Luis, not just a question, but a comment.
Yes.
That the changes to Tier 6 also came with an ability for the city to amortize the pensions payments that would allow the city to save, at least I would say not save, but to postpone payments into the pensions that starting at this year would be 1.8 billion. So there is an offset. As the pension systems begin to already vote on it, one of them already has. The other ones have a vote on this week. NYC is the one I am a member of, a trustee on, and has the highest payment. Votes tomorrow, as a matter of fact. And then TRS the following week, and police and fire the week after. What that does is it allows the city for now to have to pay and stretch out the payments for an additional 5 years. Total. Yeah. And it smoothes out the payment and lowers the impact on the physical cliff. So I just, yes,
Okay, so I want you all to know that this was not a planned transition. But here is the slide that is describing exactly what Henry is discussing.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. Sarah, do you want to? I think Henry basically summarized it. But Sarah, if you have anything to add, or perhaps other people have questions.
So, as Henry mentioned, part of the state budget legislation allows New York City's pension systems to extend their liability payment plan schedule out by 5 years. In the graph, you can see in blue is the current schedule, and that comes with a sharp drop off in payments starting in 2030. The payments would end in 2032. So the drop off would happen in 2033. Under the proposed schedule in green, if all the pensions, all 5 pension systems agree to this, you can see that it's much more level payments in the near term, and then you'd have a smaller drop off starting in 2038. And we also graphed out what it would look like if it did not include the police system, because they are so far the one pension system that has publicly stated they do not plan to participate in this. I'd like to say that the city's actuary has not spoken on this specific outcome from Albany, but the previous last year there was a proposal to do a 10-year smoothing period. And they were quite forward in saying that it would not jeopardize the city's ability to pay things, and also this does not impact pension payments for retirees.
What's the basis for the police not participating?
They've publicly stated that they won't participate
Well,
before this.
Kathy, I can tell you, I spoke with the trustees of the police, and they tend to be more conservative in their investments. They don't think that they have any assurances that the money that is going to put in the budget is going to be used for, say, labor reserves or for other things that are labor related, right? But that rather it could be used for other things, if you will, pet projects for the mayor, socialist agenda. That's basically what they have said.
Got it, I guess.
The truth is that their number is it's relatively low in relationship to the $1.8 billion the first year and the $2+ billion thereafter. They're like 125 million out of the 1.8. The reality is teachers and Bears and the TRS are the three most significant of the pension savings.
Thanks.
Okay, seeing no further questions, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so the next area of concern is the class size reduction. Both the mayor and the chancellor requested that the state, which passed the legislation requiring class sizes but did not fund that legislation, extend the timeline for full implementation. And that request was removed from budget. And as I said earlier, budget was the finalization of budget happened 4 days before the end of session. So if the class size law had not been adjusted, New York City would have been in an extremely dire circumstance, needing to hire close to 3,000 teachers over the course of the summer, which operationally seems basically impossible. That said, the 2-year extension was passed on the last day of session. And now I'm going to hand it to Sarita to talk about the new teacher incentive.
Yeah, so as Louisa mentioned, we were updating our report the minute by minute as this bill was percolating. And this section that we're showing, we did include in our testimony yesterday, but it was not in our original report because of the timing of this announcement. And so the UFT did announce an incentive bonus of $8,500 in the first year, growing to $9,500 in the second year for teachers whose classes remain above the class size caps. And so this was in recognition of the fact that the timeline was slowing and there would not be the expectation of hiring as many teachers as up to 3,000 that would have been needed to keep on the original timeline. So IBO looked at the list of classes that received exemptions last year to come up with an estimate of how much this would potentially cost in the upcoming school year. And so we estimate that about 2,500 general education teachers will be eligible for the bonuses next year. And if we assume the maximum bonus, the bonus will vary based on, particularly for middle school and high school teachers, the share of their classes that are above the cap. But assuming the maximum bonus, this could amount to an additional 21 million for the upcoming school year. And so far, it's unclear whether the Department of Education budget will require additional funds for these bonuses. We do want to note a couple of caveats that we we're not able to account for yet because of data limitations. So one is if those classes are integrated co-teaching classes, which means that they would have both a general education and special education teacher. That would increase the total costs and the number of teachers eligible. The second is if enrollment declines happen next year, which as we know, they have been fluctuating year to year. That would decrease costs. Principals' efforts to redistribute students. So this is something that we factor into our cost estimate. We don't have that level of detail in this data, so that if principals were able to, for example, shift students across multiple classes that are over the cap, that would reduce the total number of new classes that would be required. So that would decrease the cost. And then finally, as I mentioned, the bonus is up to 8,500. So if it's below that, the cost would be lower. Henry, so you have a question?
I have two questions. Thank you. You said the cost of the 8,500 would be approximately 21 million. But if the second year is 9,500,
Yes,
what
it
is the
would.
estimated cost of that second year?
Yeah, it would grow. So, and I think what's unclear, and we're still trying to figure it out, is if in the second year they're in classes that are below the cap, then we're not sure how the incentive bonus would work. So we didn't estimate year two, but I think, if you wanted to put a number on it, you could do the same calculation.
Yeah, my second question is on the top, it is estimated of 3,000 teachers, and on the bottom is 2,463, and I'm curious as to know what the difference is.
Yeah, so the 3,000 teachers would be the number of teachers they would have had to hire. The bonuses are, there are a number of caveats which we are not super granular about here, but we're basically talking about general education teachers in certain over-enrolled schools, in certain over-enrolled classrooms, but not the SHSAT schools. So
I
there are
see.
a number of caveats back and forth, which is why the numbers aren't completely equal. And
I see.
we've asked both Department of Education and OMB if they could please explain this. I also want to make it clear that while 21 million is a tiny drop in the larger $124.7 billion budget, an $8,500 bonus to an individual teacher is a big deal. And so,
Yeah,
thought it was worth highlighting.
sorry, I was just gonna say, Luisa, my concern is this gonna complete the poaching of early childhood education teachers who are already getting paid less, who are already fleeing the early childhood education, especially certified teachers that we have who have still not gotten paid. Let me say this from the 2024 contract that we agreed with the city. 85% of the people have not received their pay for the retroactive and the salary differentials that increase in order to reduce the gap on pay equity between early childhood education teachers and general education teachers represented by the UFT. It is outrageous, even when the administration agreed to upfront 80%, which we negotiated to the vendors themselves have not paid the workers. And we're in the middle of a legal battle for individuals because the vendor said, well, the city had been delaying paying us, so we have to pay our rent and we have to pay this and we have to pay that. Unacceptable. But I think this will further eviscerate. I mean, I really would the early childhood education program at a time when the mayor is proposing to do universal childcare.
I see Kathy also has a question.
Was this bonus included in the legislation?
No.
No.
So this is a contract
Yeah, we're still
or a
waiting to
deal?
hear
This is
more
a deal?
details. We've asked DOE, and this is something that was also asked at the education hearing that happened on Monday. They have not released many details yet, and so we're hoping to learn more about this agreement.
Kathy, the bonus was announced by UFT.
Well, I know that up until that the chancellor was trying to negotiate with Mulgrew this deal, a deal, it was all for his support of the state legislation. His lack of support held up the approval of the state legislation. And I know up until the bitter end, they were negotiating that. I just didn't know if it was actually incorporated in the legislation or not. Do you know if this is unprecedented, a bonus that is not performance related?
They do offer bonus like differentials for teachers that work in hard to staff schools, and so that's something that they have
I
introduced
see.
in the past. I'm not sure of the magnitude of
Yeah,
the
it's the
bonus and how
magnitude.
that compares.
And I
Yeah.
think Henry's going to add something about
Yeah,
bonuses.
just very quickly. I think, Kathy, if you include in the legislation, you violate preemption, which is meta in the Taylor law. And this is a concern. So if they included it, the Taylor law, which supersedes all of those unless it's amended, which prevents city workers from striking. There's a
Yeah,
provision in there called preemption that would not allow them to put that on the legislation.
I see. Thank you.
Any further questions on either class size reduction or the new teacher bonuses?
Lisa, the only question, and again, my apologies to folks for arriving late. I've had internet problems. Has the city said anything about what it's going to do with the specialized high schools? Are they actually going to be forced to shrink enrollment to meet the mandate, or will there be some exception?
I was just gonna say, so far they have allowed them exemptions. And so it's unclear what might happen in the future, whether that is going to continue. But based on the law, by 2030, the assumption is that all classes are in compliance. So unless that's amended,
Including the specialized high schools.
right? So.
Will the specialized high school faculty receive these bonuses?
No.
Or does the
No,
exemption
they're exempted from these
override that?
bonuses.
Okay.
Okay, next slide. Okay, then we just want to flag some areas of concern in the state budget. The first is the pied-à-terre surcharge, which we more commonly refer to as the pied-à-terre tax. The executive budget assumed $500 million annually on these non-primary residents, and this tax or this surcharge is set to expire at the end of fiscal year 2031. In order for this to work, the Department of Finance will have to phase a new sales-based valuation process for both condominium and cooperative apartments by 2029. And IBO believes that the amount of genuine revenue generated will depend on several variables, such as how are property values calculated, and how will the city administer and enforce collections, and how second property owners, in other words, those owning pied-à-terres, might behave in relationship to this surcharge. However, we clearly heard yesterday the Commissioner of Finance say that the city believes this will generate $500 million. And so we're tracking that very closely. Any questions on the pied-à-terre?
Can this be accomplished without property tax reform with state legislative? Because the method for calculating value and assessments is built into the law now.
Yes, that is the major question.
Is there an answer?
There's going to have to be, we believe there'll have to be reform. Yesterday, the finance commissioner said that the city intends to submit a comprehensive request for reform to the state prior to the beginning of the next state session. In other words, in the late fall, which is a different timeline than they had presented at prelim when they were talking about a few weeks. And we also believe that there are negotiations proceeding around some of the other litigation in this area.
So the litigation isn't, there's no deadline on the litigation at this point either.
No.
Can I say something?
Hi, Carol.
Hello. You could make an argument, there'll be a lot of litigation about this, but you can make an argument that this is not, that what happens with the property tax is not relevant, that this is not a property tax. It is a tax
It's
on,
separate.
it's not a property tax. It's not a status of the tax. It's on the individual owner and the status of the owner. And therefore, you can have a completely different way of valuing the property that is used to determine a tax. It's an income tax, basically, sort of an income tax. So they're going to expect the finance department to do it. And I am told that the finance department for quite a while now has been kind of keeping track separately of what the real value of the co-ops and the condos is for the time when it comes to be needed for property tax reform. So it's a mess, but it doesn't have to technically be part of a property tax reform.
Right. And by Carol, when you say real value, you mean the
Market
sales-based
value.
valuation.
Yes.
So that the
A
values would
valuation that's
align
based-
with what the costs are at purchase or
Yes.
sales.
But it can't really be called a property tax because the whole
It's
idea
not. It's
is
a surcharge.
tax on the property. This is a surcharge.
It is. And we just, we do recognize that many call it a pied-à-terre tax, but we're making the distinction that it is a surcharge. Okay, food supports. So an estimated 43,500 New Yorkers are at additional risk of losing their Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, their SNAP benefits, as of June of this year. Now. And this will result in up to a cut of a range, depending on how much SNAP people get, between approximately $300 to approximately $1,800 per entity receiving SNAP per month. And here we use the highest amount of potential SNAP applicant recipients and the multiplier to quantify that this could also result in about $120 million a month reduced in retail spending in the New York City region. This is a massive change in the food landscape. In the state budget, $128 million was included for 2 food pantry programs. It is commonly understood that food pantry programs are not equal to SNAP, both because of how they're accessed, how they're delivered, and that they are a different type of hunger assistance. They're not nothing, but they are still, they're not equal to SNAP. And we also want to recognize that the city added $54 million to the Community Food Connection, and it is baselined. So there are additional monies added, but there are not monies on the scale of what could occur as SNAP eligibility reduces. And I see a question from Henry.
Not so much of a question, but a comment, because the city's proposing to use AI not to qualify people started in May. We objected and issue a cease and desist order, which the city complied with. But the essence of it is they would use these AI assisted folks to do the eligibility of these folks differently in order to lower what they call is the so-called error rates, right? Which is implemented. We are extremely concerned that that AI model is going to try to justify the drop of the 43,500 people. We saw the AI model at the end of last year when on Medicaid, 37,000 people got dropped and they have to be manually done because of an incorrect model being applied for the Medicaid. And we're concerned that these untested AI models that the city's proposed in May are going to do the same. Essentially, what they want to do is take these estimated folks and be not just the 43,000, but the entire group to be roll out to have AI do the assisted qualification. And AI will look at error rates and things of that nature. Error rates means essentially people's income, especially with a lot of people who have gig workers, like that they come in. we are beyond concern of this application of the model it has proposed. So we're fighting it.
Kathy, I see your question. I just want to say in response to Henry, we are also concerned, and we are aware that there was HRA had a previous AI incident where medical assistance programming was incorrectly processed. And in order to rectify that, they needed to have a surge in overtime in the last quarter of the last calendar year. And we actually looked at the overtime and saw that it was 6 times higher than in normal comparable periods of other years. And they were, and that about $670,000 additional money was spent in overtime to address the earlier AI issue. So, and this was brought up in the general welfare hearing and has had some attention, but we are definitely paying attention to how the city is using AI and where it is, where errors are occurring and what the consequences are. I'm going to add, Kathy.
I will also just add at the general welfare hearing, they did say that they were not going to use it for eligibility determination. That it wasn't meant to replace eligibility specialists, but used as a secondary check. But that is something that we are going to continue tracking to see how that works.
Well,
Kathy?
obviously, to protect our federal funding and avoid fines, we have to do something to make sure the error rate is lower. I think, I mean, I agree with Henry on the concern about the city contracting and use of AI for this purpose, but maybe for a different reason. I just think that they're not good at choosing the right tools. It's not that I mean, AI is rapidly improving, rapidly changing, and if you get the right system in place, it can be very effective. And I think that I've met with, and Henry, I don't know if you've met Lisa Galopter, the new IT czar. But I think she's very capable. She ran Obama's digital operation, and I think it would be worth a conversation with her on this issue before opining publicly one way or the other about it, because I think if it came up yesterday in the charter revision hearings about the possibility of centralizing IT procurement, because I think certainly everybody in the tech world recognizes that the IT procurement process and the agencies is by and large a disaster, and that centralization and professionalization of that process and integration across the city instead of having every agency out there playing in traffic would be the smart thing to do. So I just think this is an opportunity, because there is a heavy financial incentive to avoid fraud. It's an opportunity to try and to look at how to better our overall procurement of technology.
And I believe the COGE hearing tomorrow is on streamlining government technology.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I may. Just to say, Kathy, the problem is this is not a contract with the city. This is a state contract that the city's piggyback on. City has no say so on the contracts for Medicaid on SNAP. That was a decision made when the Medicaid redesign team was the chief when Cuomo was here. And so the state is going forward with these contracts that were included in the budget.
I see.
And the city is actually piggyback on them because that's the state's jurisdiction. And we have had no say so in the matter, and that's kind of the problem.
I get it. Okay, thank you. I mean, I think the other issue is still valid, and probably the state's equally bad on tech procurement or worse.
Well, and I also think part of the challenge with AI is the need to be able to refresh and amend scopes, which is not an easy thing to do within government procurement.
Right.
So there are numerous challenges. Henry, did you have another comment? Your hand is still up.
Just to say that the mayor shut the AI bot that the city uses because 72% of the time tested, it gave the wrong information or an illegal one. So this teachable bot has been making mistakes all over the place. So yeah, I think the technology itself is not, there's nothing inherently evil about it. I think we have to embrace it. I think we have to work around it. But if it results in people losing benefits because of untested model, then we should really reassess that view.
So we also wanted to flag health insurance. So the New York State Department of Health estimates that between 150,000 and 450,000 individuals statewide, about half of whom are in New York City, will become uninsured because of the federal changes undercutting the New York State's essential plan. And this will start July 1. It's not immediate, it will roll in July 1 of this year. And neither the city nor the state added funds to specifically address this forthcoming issue. So this is a major area of concern for IBO.
Yeah. And Louisa, I would just, and first of all, I apologize. I can't find where I raise my hand on the Zoom. So forgive me for being a New Yorker and just jumping in. But to rephrase this, 450,000 or 460,000 people are going to lose their insurance on July 1. That's everybody in the 200 to 250% of FPL cohort. The state believes that some large percentage of that, I don't know if it's half or it's 2/3 if you believe this number, will subsequently gain insurance. I think that's very unlikely given that there were only 70,000 people who used ACA subsidies to buy individual insurance in that income cohort. And I think it's very unrealistic that you're going to have a significant increase in employer-based insurance. And I think it's just campaign oratory on the part of the state to try to minimize the impact of this, action.
Yes, and the state revised their numbers, and that's why we put the range in, but we hear you. Okay. Now we're going to talk about a couple other issues. I think Sarita's going to talk about the unclear cost containment within city FEPs.
Yeah, so the executive budget projects 235 million in annual savings, which at the time were to be achieved by unspecified administrative streamlining. There have since been a little bit more details revealed about what that means. At the general welfare hearing, there was discussion about checking for rent reasonableness for market rate units. And then also ensuring rent stabilization rules are followed to make sure that there are no broker fees that are paid, though they still have to pay broker fees for individuals on cash assistance who can't find apartments on their own per the state law, and then also increasing other types of subsidized exits. So there have been some details revealed on what strategies will be used for this cost containment effort, but that is something that we're going to be closely tracking to see whether that comes to fruition. And so these savings partially offset the large increases to this budget that the Mamdani administration added at the preliminary budget. So those amounts that were added, you could see in this chart, are the light blue bars. And that was on top of the purple bars that were at the adopted budget. And excuse me, you can also see the hashes at the top of those bars are the savings that they're recognizing in this plan. However, you could see that the growth of city FAPs is projected to still increase pretty substantially. So still reaching north of 3 billion by 2030. And then this is an area that IBO continues to wonder, whether the supply side can support this projected growth, and that's something we'll be tracking.
All right, so there are not enough apartments. Sorry, is the layperson's interpretation. Sarita, I think you're also going to talk about some of the challenges around the due process cases.
Yes. So another cost containment area are for due process cases. So these are cases filed by public and non-public school students who are entitled to receive special education services. And this table here shows this is another area where these savings are offsetting some of the additions that were made at the preliminary budget. So the net change is roughly 400 million in 2027, growing to 451 million by 2030. And that factors in the 149 million in projected savings. Now, the way they're planning to achieve these savings is actually by spending money, by boosting funding for other special education services elsewhere in the Department of Education budget. And so a portion of that is to add staff. 388 new city staff to provide special education services to students attending non-public schools. And then they're also planning to invest in special ed pre-K within the DOE system. And this is a shift that started a couple years ago. These services only used to be provided by public schools, and they're trying to enhance the DOE offerings in this area. So 839 staff growing to by the end of the financial plan period, 898 staff. So adding substantial funds along with that. So 137 million in 27, growing to 152 million in 2030. Henry?
Thank you. This is a direct cause and effect of cutting city workers that resulted in the increase. I've lost 90% of the assistant placement officers. 90%. These are the people responsible for evaluating the IEPs and placing them in services of the kids. So as a result of it, parents seek litigation with the stuff that they're required to have for the kids. And then almost 100% of the times those litigations are successful. And they replace those workers with an answering machine. I kid you not. So if your child gets evaluated by an IEP and requires certain services, you call a 1-800 God knows what number, and you record it. And so what it exists as evidence is that the cut of city workers in the assistant placement, the placement officers for children with disability have resulted in massive private school spending by the city of New York.
Carol?
Oh, you're
Carol,
muted.
you're muted.
I just wanted to express skepticism that the increase in headcount, however well-intentioned, is going to, in the length of time of the financial plan, really dramatically change the results of due process cases. It will take a long time for people to have confidence that the services and the quality of the services is tremendously changed by this. And they will keep filing the cases, and they will keep winning the cases. So over the long term, this may have an impact, but I think that the fiscal plan savings, and even so, it's still $500 million a year that we're spending on this. But I'm skeptical that those results will show as quickly as the plan projects.
Yeah, it's actually over $1 billion that annually that is spent on the total budget. But yeah.
Okay. So then we would like to transition to some of the other work, unless there are other questions on the executive budget. So we'd like to transition to some of our other work that we've recently published that we think is timely, and we'd also like to highlight some of our staff. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the rent stabilized housing stock. And here that we created two reports, and we also testified to the Rent Guidelines Board. And to give further details as to what our analysis found, I'm going to hand it to Sarah Internicola.
Great, thank you, and good morning, everybody. So we recently published two reports in the start of a series on rent stabilized housing. The first was called Segments of the Rent Stabilized Stock. So we explore the makeup of the rent stabilized stock by different notable categories, including geography, building age, median rents, and rents of apartments, and the share of a building that is stabilized. And in the second report, Demystifying Distress, we look at indicators of physical and financial distress across those categories of the stock that we defined in the first piece. And we also compare these statistics with other non-stabilized housing citywide. So those indicators we look at are open hazardous housing maintenance code violation rates, emergency repair program charges, which is when HPD has to go and fix uncorrected hazardous violations in a building, historic enrollment in the alternative enforcement program, another HPD program for chronically distressed buildings, as well as 2025 tax lien sale eligibility and inclusion in the sale, which is an indicator of financial distress when owners are not paying their bills. And we presented on this work at the Rent Guidelines Board hearing on May 21st. And yeah, next I'll highlight a few key figures and findings from the reports. Great. So yeah, as I mentioned, in the first report, we looked at numbers of apartments and buildings across different categories of the stock. We analyzed about 928,000 apartments across 43,000 buildings. So just to highlight one figure from that report, here we break down the number of rent stabilized apartments by its rent, ranging from under 1,000 to over 2,500. That's the color coding and the legend, as well as the share of the building that's rent stabilized, ranging from less than 25% to over 90%. So here you can see that the largest bars are in the over 90% category, making up the majority of the stock. But thinking about how that aligns with rents, we find that 1/3 of rent stabilized apartments have rents under 1,500 and are in buildings over 90% stabilized. So these low rent, highly stabilized units get a lot of focus in the discussion, but don't carry the majority of the stock. So that's one thing we wanted to point out. And we also find that there are more stabilized apartments renting over 2,500 than under 1,000. So just underscoring the presence of higher rent units within the stock. Next slide, please. So next I'll talk a bit about the second report, Demystifying Distress. As I mentioned, we're looking at indicators of distress across both different categories of the rent stabilized stock, as well as compared to citywide non-stabilized housing averages. Distress has really been at the center of the debate around rent guidelines this year, but there hasn't been a really clear picture of the current conditions in the stock and the extent of distress, where it might be concentrated or not, and how that compares to conditions citywide. So here we're really digging into that question in the report. So highlighting one figure, here we're looking at the number of stabilized buildings by its housing maintenance code violation rate. That's in the legend. And this is broken out by building age. That's a distinction we explore more in the first report. And what we find is that most rent stabilized apartments, 66% buildings, 66% have a housing maintenance code violation rate below the citywide average. That's represented by the navy blue bars, which suggests that most of the stock is in good condition. But we do find a small number of buildings and apartments showing severe conditions. To highlight that, the city administrative code defines a distressed property as one with a violation rate of at least 5 hazardous housing maintenance code violations per unit, among other criteria. We did find 600 rent stabilized buildings, or 1% of those analyzed, with 5 or more hazardous violations per unit. That's represented by the pink bars. But we want to emphasize that those conditions are not limited to rent-stabilized housing. We found an additional 923 non-rent stabilized buildings, or 1.6% of those analyzed, with 5 or more hazardous housing code violations per unit. So housing quality is a concern for a small number of both stabilized and non-stabilized buildings citywide. And then, yeah, much more figures in the report. So for more information about how that compares across those different categories, please refer to the report. And yeah, next slide, please. So to conclude with our key findings from these 2 reports, which were the focus of our testimony to the Rent Guidelines Board, the first piece underscores the fact that the rent-stabilized housing stock is not a monolith and varies really widely by the categories we explored. And second, in the distress piece, we found that the majority of rent-stabilized buildings show conditions similar to or better than citywide non-stabilized averages. So we don't find distress to be widespread, but it does affect a small portion of stabilized buildings as well as non-stabilized buildings. And then since our analysis compares conditions among categories of the rent-stabilized stock, which more in the report, we do see that signs of distress tend to be more common for buildings that are pre-1974, lower rent, highly stabilized, or located in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. But even among these categories that are often a focus of the discussion, the majority of buildings do tend to show conditions that are similar or better than citywide. Thanks.
Any questions on our rent stabilized reports? Okay. Then we wanted to pivot to affordability in the transit system. And so as to demonstrate that we were not preferential, one of the 2 models currently being discussed, on the same day, we published both a report on fare-free buses and a report on the fare fares and what the consequences of shifting the model might be from a cost and operations perspective. And so I'm going to hand it now to Emily to discuss this more.
Great. Thank you, Louisa. Good morning, everyone. So like Louisa just said, there's a really big transit conversation happening this spring, which is how is the city going to make transit more affordable for New Yorkers? The mayor wants his universal fare-free buses. City council is, and in particular, Speaker Menon is now pushing to expand instead fare fares, which is the city's half-price discount for low-income New Yorkers. And we also have transit advocates who are interested in all of the above. They've been pushing for fare fares to expand for a long time, not necessarily opposed to free buses. So this seems like a really great conversation for IBO to weigh in on with some independent, nonpartisan numbers to help folks with accurate information. So next slide, please. Great. So I wanted to give you all a brief overview of what's on the table before we turn to results from our studies. So these 2 proposals we want to emphasize are not mutually exclusive. If we have free buses, it doesn't mean the city couldn't expand fare fares in some form, but they are very different. And so we wanted to give you a side-by-side comparison. Of course, currently, if you ride the bus, you pay $3 to get on the bus unless you have a transfer. Or you might have the MTA's half-price discount, which is for seniors or riders with qualifying disabilities. For fare fares, this is a program that offers right now half-price subway and bus rides for New Yorkers. But you must be a resident. You have to meet certain eligibility criteria. Most importantly, your income has to be at or below 150% of that federal poverty level, which you can see we have the income levels on the slide. It's quite low. It's actually well below full-time minimum wage. This is, I want to emphasize, a city-run, city-funded half-price discount. And if you qualify for the MTA's discount or really any other discount, you cannot participate in fare fares. So there are some exclusions. The proposals, of course, one hand, get rid of that $3 fee, fare-free buses for all riders. For fare fares, there are really 2 kind of distinct proposals on the table. Some folks are pushing to raise that income eligibility threshold. So from that low 150% federal poverty level up to some higher percentage. And then there's separate proposals. This is really Speaker Menon's proposal to expand the program's discount, keep eligibility the same, but go from a half price to a full fare, like free ride, essentially. Um, who would pay for these different proposals, we think is very important to emphasize. There's some confusion on this point we've seen. For fare-free buses, it's really still to be determined. This is not something that the city might pay for entirely. In fact, it's something that we could see the MTA paying for, maybe funded by the city, partly funded by the state. It's really subject to negotiation. But Fair Fares is a city-run, city-funded program. And so we do expect the costs we're about to show you to really be coming from the city's budget mostly. There's maybe some room to negotiate a cost share, but we do really expect that to be a city payment. Um, and who decides on these policies is a little different. For buses, it's not just the mayor's call that requires buy-in from the state and the MTA. But for Fair Fares, as a city program, something entirely city run, it's something the city could decide to expand really whenever it wants. And so, yeah, we have some kind of distinctions between these two that we think are important. That's the lay of the land. I'm going to turn it now for our results over to John Mendez, who worked on our free bus estimate.
Thank you, Emily. So for fare free buses, what we did was we looked at the annual cost of implementing fare free bus service starting in calendar year 2027. For context, we did a similar analysis back in 2023, and what we are doing now is updating with more relevant, important, new recent data, but also looking at additional factors in which have an impact on the total net cost of implementing fare-free buses. And what we found is that looking at all of those factors, looking at recent data, the net annual cost is estimated to be around 1.1 billion for 2027 for fare-free buses. To the right, you'll see a chart with some of the numbers and the factors that we looked at. There's a couple of specific things or executive decisions that we made. One of them being that we expect that ridership will increase as buses are made fare free. We estimated a 25% immediate increase in bus ridership. This is based on data from the MTA's fare free bus pilot that happened a couple of years ago, where we saw a 24% increase across all pilot bus routes as a result of fare-free buses. So we baked that into our estimate. We also included all buses. So if you're familiar with your sort of typical bus, it's the $3 fare, but we also have express buses that brings in commuters from some of the outer boroughs into some of Manhattan. Those have a higher fare, and therefore we included those as well in our total estimate. Now, for the factors that we included, we looked at the loss of MTA bus fare box revenue as the largest cost. This is what people usually talk about when it comes to making buses free. It's replacing the cost of the fare. But we also looked at increased labor, maintenance, and capital expenses associated with the expanded bus service and fleet size. You need to buy new buses. If you want to keep service at the same level, you need to hire new bus operators. And you also need to, maintain those buses as they run more. So those were some of the factors that we looked at, and you can see the breakdown in costs to the right. But we also looked at savings. So where are the areas that the MTA could see savings or reduced costs? And what we found is that you can get some savings from, first of all, not having to enforce a fare. So if you remember now, we have the Eagle teams checking the fares, so you would not have anybody checking the fares. You could also find savings from not having to maintain, operate, and install the Omni machines on the buses. Whether or not they're removed, that's a different question, but you would not have to install new ones as new buses come in. But you can also see some changes in rider behavior. So now people that used to get a free transfer from the subway to from the bus to the subway now would pay at the subway fare gate instead. So those are, some changes in how people behave and therefore some changes in where revenue is seen at the MTA level. All that to say that we estimate the total annual cost of fare-free buses at around $1.1 billion for 2027. Now, we do know that there are certain changes that we could do here, and expecting behavior can be really hard. And so we looked at alternative scenarios in which um, we looked at less ridership. So instead of a 25% increase in ridership, we looked at a 15% increase. We also looked at a higher scenario where we estimated a 35% increase in ridership as a result of fare-free buses. And with that said, we also did some scenarios in which express buses would not be included. So the sort of range that we're looking at here, depending on that ridership increase percentage and whether or not buses are included, express buses are included, it ranges from around $900 million to $1.3 billion as sort of your higher range. As Emily mentioned, one of the important things here is that this is all subject to negotiations between the MTA and the city where it comes to costs. And so this is just a total net cost that we estimate fare-free buses would have. Um, and I'll take questions now as I seen Catherine has a question.
Is this net, is the 1.3 billion additional cost, is that net of the 60% of people who don't pay the fares now? I mean, have you taken that out of the equation?
So what we're looking at now is paid ridership. So all of the estimates that we used here is just paid ridership because that's really the revenue
So,
that the MTA is getting right now.
right, but the losses, if you added the, whatever, 700 million they're losing a year for non-payment of fares, it seems like it's I mean, the gap, I think, is bigger in terms of what is the economic.
Yeah, so part of the challenge in quantifying the non-riders is that it's hard to quantify the non-riders. MTA has numbers on the non-riders. There are other
Non-payers,
estimates.
non-payers.
Non-paying, but I didn't mean non-riders. I mean non-paying riders. But so we're not including them because we don't have solid data on them.
Yeah, but so I just think that this is, from the MTA's perspective, a couple things. I've been over involved with the MTA for many years and on these, looking at these issues. And number one, I think that from their perspective, they would count the non-payment because they're on a mission to try and collect those fares. So they would project a bigger cost, number one. Number two, all their calculation, I don't see any scenario where the MTA or the state picks up any of this cost. There, and you don't have in here like, so for example, high school kids that have school passes, the city pays that. The MTA does not pick up those benefits. Those, the freebies that the city wants, the city pays for. And I don't think that's in your numbers now, because that's not under fair fares. That's the whole student thing.
Yeah, we do include that in our report as an example of an arrangement that could be, because that student arrangement does not vary by the number of students. It's a flat amount. So that is something that we mention in our report.
Okay,
Could
I
be
haven't read it yet.
an arrangement.
And then, but the other thing is, in all the negotiations of the payroll mobility tax, of congestion pricing, of the corporate tax, the real estate transfer tax, all the various contributions that go to the MTA. Historically, the argument and the way we've gotten employers, business to step up, for example, and sold congestion pricing that, people who drive into the city should help contribute. is that there is a balance, a fair balance between the riders who pay their share, the corporate business community pays its share, et cetera. So I think there's a fundamental break in kind of what the bargain has been for broad-based support of mass transit that our young mayor isn't necessarily familiar with, but I think it's pretty basic, and I think it's a major obstacle. I think the fair fares approach, which is like this, similar to the student approach, where the city says, okay, we want to provide this benefit to our residents, that works. But remember, this affects Long Island, Mid-Hudson, Connecticut. This is, the economics, the finances of the MTA are not just New York City. It's a bigger bargain. So I think this is a much more complex issue than it's been made in the last campaign.
And Kathy, we're about to talk about fair fares, but before we do that, maybe we should just quickly take Carol's question.
Well, there is a question, but also a comment on what Kathy is saying, which is Kathy, you're talking about the policy and whether user fees are important to they're not talking about the underlying policy. They're just quantifying. IBO is just showing you what the relative costs of these things are. They're not taking a position on whether they're a good idea from a policy point of view. Whether we think they should do that is another question, but this report is just quantifying. But with respect to the quantifying, let me ask you the same question Kathy did, but maybe in a different way. Your foregone fare box revenue, $945 million. Is that calculated on the basis of the number of people who are riding the bus times the fare? Or is it calculated on the actual receipts that the MTA reports they've received from people on the buses? Because if it's the first, then it includes what Kathy was asking about.
Paid ridership.
It's paid.
It's paid ridership.
Paid ridership,
So it
correct.
does not include the people who are getting on the bus without paying. So
Correct.
the foregone bus fare revenue is even larger than this, which is what Kathy's point was. But we have no way. I mean, the MTA gives an estimate of how much it is.
I feel strongly that should be included.
That's what I was going to say. Isn't there a good argument to make the foregone bus fare revenue, or at least have another line that says, if foregone bus fare revenue overstates what you're showing? This is actual paid revenue as opposed to people who are cheating.
And we are, I'm just what. We are very clear in the paper that, like, over and over we repeat, this is paid fare revenue. And that was something that the MTA, when we spoke with them on this report, very much wanted us to emphasize. Part of the thing that we had internal discussions on was the difficulty of, like, right now the MTA is getting $945 million in fare revenue. To say, oh, but in a alternative scenario, they could get this additional money is also assuming that they could. And currently they're not. So at some level, we really struggled with what to do with that, because it's not like it's money the MTA is getting right now, those unpaid riders.
But they're owed it.
I'm not arguing with that. And that's where we struggled.
Well, it should be disclosed.
Yeah, it's in there, but I hear you, Kathy, and the clarity. Paquita? Paquita went away.
Sorry, I was just going to ask the question about the cost. If they're not receiving the revenue, is it in fact a cost to them? And so if it's disclosed, I think that's sufficient, because one of the things they also capture in the report is the change in enforcement, or the requirements for enforcement, given that there wouldn't be a required fare. So I just wanted to raise those 2 points. So.
So thank you. And we hear your concerns in this area. Why don't we go to the next report and just in the interest of time, because it's past 9:15. And that is Emily, right? Speaking about fair
Yep,
fares.
yeah, I can jump in here with this one. So I want to share with you all the results of the Fair Fares analysis, separate paper. This estimates not just one bottom line, but actually 5 different bottom lines, because we are looking at multiple proposals out there for ways to expand the program. We wanted to make sure we were addressing the options on the table from the speaker's proposal to make fair fares free for current eligible riders, all the way to like changes in the income qualification level. So what you see in the chart are those 5 scenarios. I'll kind of walk you through them left to right, and then I give you some more context. So the very first scenario we looked at again is that speaker's proposal of no eligibility change, but to instead increase the discount. And I should say the costs that you're seeing in this table are additional costs. So those are on top of what we estimate to be a 90 million annual cost to the program if no changes are made. So this is sort of that additional funding you would need to see in the budget in order to make this expansion happen. In addition to looking at the speaker's proposal, we also looked at a slightly different version of that. So not just making fair fares free for people who are currently eligible, but also thinking about who's excluded from the program. And so what would it cost the city, for example, if they wanted to make that benefit available to the seniors and the riders with disabilities who right now only qualify for the MTA's separate discount. If we wanted to bring them into the program and offer them a full discount, we did estimate the cost of that in the second bar. And then lastly, separately, we looked at the scenarios that many advocates are pushing for, which is to keep the discount the same, but just include more people. And so we have an estimate of the cost needed to expand from 150% federal poverty level to 200% to 300% and then to 400%. I'm thinking about all the way from the long-term advocate target of 200% up to what would be something like a $30 minimum wage with the 400% FPL eligibility. You can see a couple of things just from putting these costs next to each other on a chart. The cheapest expansion would be to 200% federal poverty level. The most expensive would be to 400%. But we also see things like the council speaker's proposal is more expensive, we estimate, than making that expansion to 200% FPL eligibility. We also see that if the council decides they want to include folks like seniors and riders with disabilities in that proposal, it's the second most expensive bar on the chart. So we're already seeing some trade-offs between these different options. We will be briefing key council staff later this week, so we will have time to kind of walk them through all of the options and answer their questions. Lastly, I just want to mention a couple things about the estimates that we think are important takeaways. These costs really depend on how many people sign up for the program and then how much transit they use once they're in the program. The cost to the city right now is very direct. Every time someone with Fair Fares taps their card, they pay half of the fare that's due and the city pays the other half. So we expect that as this program expands, we will see higher enrollment and higher transit use. Right now, enrollment in the Fair Fares program has been pretty low, and that transit use has been fairly low, which has kept costs down. We're looking at about 40% of eligible people right now actually enroll in the program, and those who are in the program are using about 3 trips per week, which may be lower than you expect. We think that if the program is made free, we would absolutely see more people sign up and use the benefit more. And if the program is expanded to higher income levels, you start to reach more regular transit commuters. Even just expanding to the 200% federal poverty level, we see a big jump in census data in that. And so we absolutely expect those folks to sign up and use the program more, and that will bring city costs higher. So yeah, we think this the set of estimates gives the many stakeholders involved a menu to choose from, a more realistic look at the cost of expansion. We're thinking about rider behavior. We're thinking about the context of other discounts. So yeah, we hope this helps them. And we do have a webinar coming up next week that will walk people through the methodology a little bit more. We'd really appreciate it if you share that with your networks as well. But maybe we'll pause for any other questions here.
Yeah, so Emily, yesterday at the City Council, we were asked repeatedly about the sign-up procedures. And this sort gets back to some of the questions the advisory committee had about technology use. To be eligible for a fair fare, one needs to be either an existing account holder on Access NYC or go through the Access NYC process, which is a online benefits calculator and is not necessarily a low bureaucracy process. In addition to requiring information like your income tax returns and the proof of income, etc., they also take weeks to process. And so as Fair Fares is reliant on CTL, the city could make a choice to not use this system, but rather use some other system to allot fair fares. And we highlighted that yesterday, and we think it's an option to consider.
Yeah, and if I may, I'll just add, this is the really kind of the difference between that universal program on the one hand with free buses. You're very easy if you're, any rider just gets on the bus, they don't, have to sign up for that benefit. There is a separate sign up process that not everybody makes it through in fair fares. So we want to be clear that's some of that enrollment rate that we see that's quite low could in part be due to some of the barriers to folks accessing it.
Mary?
Yeah, what I'm curious about is comparing all these scenarios with another scenario that the MTA is doing these pilot programs about putting doors, different kind of turnstiles, or I've seen some of them. It's like in Europe, and where the doors close and then open, and presumably not allow too many people to go through without paying. So this has a cost to them, but I was wondering whether, assuming that such pilot program can be expanded everywhere, how would and the implication would be that there would fewer people would be riding free with that. So comparing that kind of scenario with all this, whether you have considered that. And also once there's a control over some control over how many people cheat, that does affect the behavior of everybody else. That people that say, "Oh, I'm not the sucker, so I have to pay my fare." I think that makes a very big difference. So it is possible. Like if I were in the MTA's decision process, I would definitely go and expand these pilot programs everywhere I can, and then consider other options.
I'll just mention that we did not make that direct comparison in the fair fares analysis, because we think of it as kind of a separate thing from fare enforcement. It is expanding this program is something the MTA supports, and they do talk about it as part of their fare evasion strategy. I will say just more on the education and like connecting people to benefit side and less on that sort of enforcement cost or even the capital cost of adding the fare gates, like you mentioned. There's not really a direct line to draw. I think they would support expanding this program and getting people to use transit more and get those full fares in from the city and folks, even while still doing the fare gate pilot that you mentioned. But you're absolutely right. Those kinds of investments do change the way that people pay the fare and might have implications for the revenue that we see in the other analysis, which does actually come from MTA's own projections of what they think will happen next year. But how much they're factoring in those pilot programs in that projection, I'm not sure.
The MTA would support it so long as the city's paying for it.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yes. Okay, next slide. Any other questions on fare fares or free buses? So we just wanted to highlight, we're doing a webinar. Please do share this with your networks if you think it might be of interest. And here's all the information. You can scan the QR code. And next slide. So we have 2 additional advisory committee meetings this calendar year. And here I need to say that IBO really is going to move to 1 Battery Park Plaza, the 4th floor. And we are hoping that our September meeting can be in person, but we are not totally sure yet. But the construction is happening, and today, sanitation is dismantling many IBO cubes and taking them to a sanitation office to be used in the world of sanitation. So it's a transition is really here. We're delighted. Anyway, 2 more meetings, September 16th and December 16th. Here is the Zoom link. They're both at 8 a.m. And it might be that we could be in person, but we'll give you ample warning. And we're hoping at some point to host you. We know we will host you at some point. We're hoping it will be able to be in the fall. Any other questions?
Louisa, what is your kind of forward calendar of reports? Do you keep the advisory board apprised of what the coming attractions are?
Yes, I don't think in the appendix we have coming reports. I think we have things we've just published, but I'm happy to share with you, what's in the hopper. So we have a Airtable system and we track like 6 months out.
Great.
Quick question. What have you calculated or reflected in your city budget projections, the increase in revenue that was announced this week or the end of last week?
No, our budget projection is of when we published, so we are not yet. But we will be watching this and we will incorporate it moving forward.
Because it would be really interesting to look carefully at what that 2 billion in unanticipated revenue is and what it suggests about the projections over the next couple of years, whether it's indicative of a trend or the opposite.
So, while we are delighted with additional revenue, we are concerned that it is not indicative of a trend given the enormous fluctuations in the global and local economy, or the potential fluctuations. And so, Kathy, we actually thought about this in depth yesterday before we went in to speak to the city council. Things can change really, really fast. So delightful, but it's hard to see it as an actual trend, particularly looking at the employment market and the shift in income and some other factors.
Thank you.
The one comment I would add to that is I think it would be useful just to track the state revenue estimate and the city revenue estimate as points of comparison. I mean, if the state is much lower than the city, maybe the city's realistic and the state is sandbagging, or vice versa. But they're so interconnected, and I don't really see them compared very often in public reports.
Yeah, we tend to compare city controller, the administration, but we don't include state. And I hear you, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay. Paquita, do you want to take us out?
Yes, thank you all for your contributions, and thank you for the work that you continue to do so well at the IBO. And we'll look forward to seeing you in September, possibly in person in the new location.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.